Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about single single creator projects and multi-creator platforms and what it means for Dungeons and Dragons. All right, so let's get into this. All right, so let me give you an example of a single creator project as opposed to a multi-creator platform. Okay, here we go. All right. So single creator project. I'm not sure if you guys have read this, but so it's a book. It's a novel. It's called Kings of the Wild, W-Y-L-D, right? And it's by Nicholas Eames. And it is a fantastic book. It's an amazing fantasy book that does something really unique with fantasy, and that is it treats the player character group, right? So think traditional fantasy, right? And when you think traditional fantasy, you're thinking Americanized Tolkien, right? So you're thinking Lord of the Rings, but with an American spin. That's modern fantasy, American fantasy. We're transitioning into American fantasy, right? And basically, which I think American fantasy is the most relevant fantasy. And one of the things that's happening with Tolkien's work right now is it's being very solidly Americanized, right? And I think this is a big trend, like transition of fantasy from Britain, who really were the owners of fantasy, to America. America kind of owns fantasy as a genre now. Okay, all right. So Kings of the Wild, think you have your ranger, you have your fighter, you have your wizard, you have your cleric, right? You have your thief, right? You have your player character group, and what he does in there that makes this a really unique book is he treats the questing as the traveling of a band, right? So each dungeon location, each spot, each monster slain is a gig on a band tour, right? And it's brilliant. It is so Kings of the Wild is a single creator project, right? And he's done additional books in the series, all right? But Kings of the Wild is a perfect example of a single creator project, right? Brilliant book, very cool fantasy world, right? But it's a single creator project. So at this point, to my knowledge, there are no games connected to it. There are no big or small screen projects connected to it. There are no other authors writing within that world, right? And so it's a single creator project, right? And in the old days, these were pretty freestanding, and they were really valuable, right? Their value is close to dirt now. And the reason why is we now live in a world where we fully understand the value of a multi-creator platform. So let's talk about a multi-creator platform. Here you go, Mandalorian. The Mandalorian season 3 just dropped, okay? And this is truly a multi-creator platform. This is Jon Favreau coming in, and I think is it Mark Filoni? I know the Filoni part is right. So let's just talk about Jon Favreau. So Jon Favreau coming in, and he's doing work on top of George Lucas's work, and George Lucas dropped Star Wars into place and immediately brought in a second director on Empire Strikes Back, right? And within a couple of years of the Star Wars project launching on the big screen, he then allowed literally hundreds of writers to begin writing novels, right? And he allowed, probably 100 plus writers to write on comic books. And he allowed the creation of toys. And at this point, you can see they're not even remotely the same, right? Kings of the Wild, I could walk down any main street in America and say, hey, I have $1,000 for you if you can name me a Star Wars character. And I could, and I would not make it down the main street of any U.S. city while I was still holding the $1,000 in my hand. It would probably be the first or second or third person I met, and they'd go Luke Skywalker or Han Solo or Chewbacca or Leia Organa or Lando Calrissian or R2-D2, and I could meet a person who could list literally 100 characters in almost any main street in America. Same money, right? Say, hey, can you tell me one character from Kings of the Wild? Single creator project versus multi-creator platform. And I am saying that what's really special is once you have an unselfishness connected to a project, and you are willing to deal with the massive amounts of problems that multi-creator platforms have, you're going to have something special, and you're going to have something better, right? And so what does this mean for Dungeons and Dragons? So let's dig into this, right? Because one, I've done it, right? So I spent 2 years running one of the most unusual tabletop roleplay Dungeons and Dragons campaigns ever. And what we did was we went around the table, and there were no less than 6 dungeon masters involved, and we would run from 8 to 10 p.m. We would run from 8 to 10 p.m., right? And so we would run from 8 to 10 p.m. And we would run from 6 to 8 p.m. And then the dungeon master would get done and literally hand the story over to an 8 to 10 p.m. person. We're able to run this for 2 years. We have a huge collection of what exactly happened. We have kind of a story arc, and we captured what happened during that story. And that story also exists in every one of those DMs' minds, right? And it became something truly special. It was highly problematic, right? And there was incredible amount of tension and stress between the dungeon masters, right? I remember specifically, I flooded Neverwinter, right? I literally had a huge flood hit Neverwinter, and the entire, half the merchants were dead, urchins needed to be rescued. There were, entire libraries where magical scrolls were floating through the city. And I ran from 6 to 8 p.m., right? And this dungeon master had no idea what was going to happen in it. And I was like, okay, it's now, 8 to 10 p.m. Here you go. I'm handing this over. Neverwinter has been flooded. And the dungeon master just shook his head and was like, what are you talking about? You cannot possibly expect me to pick up from here. And it was a lot of strain and a lot of pressure and a lot of frustration, right? But we did that together, and to this day, it is one of the most memorable Dungeons and Dragons campaigns I've ever, actually gone through. And I think we had at least 28 sessions. I think the number was 28 sessions. And then, and we had really epic tales that spanned all kinds of cities and all kinds of adventure types, and it was truly incredible, right? So here's the question now. Now that we know, as Americans, that multi-creator platforms are just infinitely more valuable than single-creator projects, how do we begin to put this on rails and actually allow dungeon masters and, equally importantly, players, how do we allow players to own their own content and be able to portably pull player characters from one story to the next? And actually, you know what? I just want, because a lot of these concepts are so huge and so broad, let's limit the scope right now to player characters, right? So, in that game that we played, each of the players, every single dungeon master, not only dungeon master, but they played, right? So let's talk about those player characters, right? So we had 28 sessions together, right? And I had a player character in there named Beryl. He was a Turtle Wizard, okay? If I want to take Beryl Turtle Wizard actually died in that game, but let's say that he didn't, and he had lived, right? Beryl the Turtle Wizard went from level 4 all the way to level 11 in that game, right? How do I take Beryl the Turtle Wizard and take him to a new table, right? And do it in a way that the bog standard dungeon master should accept what I've done, right? So that's the goal, right? I run Beryl the Turtle Wizard in one Dungeons and Dragons campaign from level 4 to level 11. Now I want to port him over to a new game, right? So there's so many problems here, but let's start to talk this through. So when I arrive at the new game, they all started at first level, and they went through 8th level, right? And right now in Dungeons and Dragons, if I go to a new table, right, I go across town, and my old dungeon master was Sally, and now my new dungeon master is Charisse, right? So I go to Sharice and I say, okay, listen, I know you have a game going right now. You got 4 players at the table, and they're all at 8th level, and they all started at 1st level. I don't want to create a new character in your game. I'm invested in Beryl, this turtle wizard, right? And the dungeon master is like, well, listen, you know, all 4 of my player characters are 8th level, right? And your guy's coming from Faerun, but this game is happening in Dragonlance, right? So and our game is about the Knights of Solamnia. And so, one, you're running a turtle. I haven't even introduced a turtle in my world. You're 3 levels higher than the rest of my players, right? And in addition to that, you're from a world that you're from Forgotten Realms, and this is Kryn, right? So those are all so it's all problematic. As it stands today, right? What would happen is the dungeon master would say, I'm an engaged dungeon master. I run Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm an engaged modern dungeon master. And as an engaged modern dungeon master, I'm telling you, no, this is a single creator project, right? This ain't no multi-creator platform, right? I'm not acknowledging the work your other dungeon master did. That's what would happen today, right? What I want to do is I want to change that, right? I think we need to start building in Dungeons & Dragons a way to overcome every obstacle I just talked about, right? And overcome the no, right? I have invested costs. I have invested time in Beryl the Turtle Wizard, and I want to play Beryl the Turtle Wizard in the Dragonlance game with these other 8th level characters, and I want to keep my 3 additional levels over, and I want to keep my turtle in a campaign where a turtle has never been seen in Kryn. And there's legit reasons why Kryn would not have turtles, because when Hickman and Weiss created it, turtles didn't even exist, right? So what do we do? Well, first of all, we let's just acknowledge the truth, right? Your single creator project is worthless, and this multi-creator platform is more valuable, right? So one, your desire to keep a 11th level turtle, an 11th level Forgotten Realms turtle out of your 8th level Dragonlance game needs to give way, right? Because it's a less valuable story, right? And that's another thing. This is Scott Garibay, right? Like I'm not for like just run whatever you want, right? I'm like, hey, we got 75 years on this planet, right? And we need to take D&D to the next level. We can't allow we can't allow Wizards of the Coast to be a $1 billion company. They should be a $100 billion company, and D&D should be mainstream, right? And that means the nonsense of anything goes, you could shove that over to OSC. You can shove that over to DCC. You could shove that over to Pathfinder, where all the scrub game masters are, right? This is for real dungeon masters who are changing the world with their table, right? And when you reach there, you're like, this is more valuable. This matters, right? So less valuable sucks, and we're not going to deal with it. More valuable, go, right? Like slow gotta go, right? So one, the dungeon master as an engaged modern dungeon master. And what if she says, I'm not, I don't like, shove over, right? Give up your dungeon master seat and shove your butt over a amazing game in Old School Essentials. They'll more than be happy to take you there. They take any scrub trash DM. They'll take any scrub trash game master who can roll on another random encounters table for another thing to kill, right? Like get out of get up from that dungeon master seat and go serve where nothing matters, right? Old School Essentials, DCC, Pathfinder, right? So one, we acknowledge that we need to start to change and embrace what's valuable and give up what's not valuable. And single creator projects are not valuable, right? And multi-creator platforms are immensely, if not infinitely valuable. We know this from Harry Potter. We know this from Star Wars. We know this from Marvel. We know this. We don't know it from DC. DC is like burning their legacy to the ground right now. But HP, Star Wars, Marvel, there's more than enough proof right there that multi-creator platforms are valuable. So how do we do this? I think the first thing we do is, if as a dungeon master, right, the first thing we do is at the beginning of every single session we run, we write our name down as a dungeon master. We write down the name of the player and the name of the player character, the player character's level, and the date of the campaign, and the date and the name of the campaign and the session, and we hand that card out to every single player at the table who was there last time, right? And the first thing we do is we begin to set a physical, tangible record of this character was played at this time in this game. And so that player, when I go to Sharice's game, I show up and I have 16 cards, all right, and it says, this is the name of my game master, this is the date the game happened, and this is the player character I ran there. And this is the physical player character. I'm handing it to you now, and guess what? You are going to submit to the concept of multi-creator platform. And I know you liked having your 8th level Dragonlance campaign, but if you're a modern engaged dungeon master, engaging in preserving and making Dungeons & Dragons powerful, these bits of paper preempt your desires for your game. That's how we begin to create value in player characters, for player characters, make them portable, right? And push back the power of dungeon masters, which needs to be curbed, and some of that power needs to start going to the player characters. Every word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. I'd love to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic, please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.